Okay, it says it couldn't start as transcription, but it's starting recording.
Yeah.
Okay, so you should see that on your screen. Right, here's a spoken language. So I will send this out to you, but I'm really aware of bombarding you with too many emails and too many things per email. So I'll send this out in a separate email with the word spoken language on it. So basically, all it does is just a breakdown of what the spoken task is, the presentation, which must be formal. Okay, it can be a talk, a debate, a speech, a dialogue. Okay, it needs to be planned and organized, which you know. You can use notes or a PowerPoint to assist you, but you can't read from it. So it does have to be a speaking assessment rather than a reading assessment where you're reading from a piece of paper. But obviously you can have notes to refer to, that's fine. Okay. Uh, Oops, gone too far then. So as part of the presentation, everyone must listen to and respond to questions and feedback. So for example, if Alex is doing her presentation, at the end, I would expect 3 or 4 people from the class to ask her questions about her presentation. And that will form part of her grade, how well she responds to those questions, how well she's able to answer them. Is she listening to what's being asked of her? Um, Obviously, you won't be the expert on any topic. So if somebody does ask you a question and you don't know the answer to it, it's about how you respond. So simply saying, "Oh, that's an interesting point. I hadn't considered that before. It's something I'll look into and come back to," is absolutely fine, because what it means is that you are using language appropriately, okay, to express that you don't know, basically. Okay, so there's no, it doesn't matter that you don't know. It's not an assessment on what you know, it's an assessment on how you respond, on your language usage. Okay, um let's have a look. If we move down, um so assessment, there's no marks going to be considered. Okay, it will just be based on competency, so it will just be a pass, a fail, a pass, a merit, or a distinction. And what determines those are, yeah, let's go down, that's all technical. Okay, so a pass is here. Okay, um and if you look at the vocabulary, it's very, very similar to an exam board. This is about expressing straightforward ideas, information, and feelings. This is about expressing challenging ideas, information, feelings with a range of vocabulary. And this one is expressing sophisticated ideas, information. So you're doing this, but you're doing it in a more sophisticated way, using a sophisticated repertoire or vocabulary. Um, the second bullet point is about structure. You've attempted to organize and structure your presentation. This is where you've done it clearly and appropriately to meet the needs of the audience. So you're aware of who your audience is and you've structured it in such a way that your topic is easy for them to understand. This one is that you have done it using a range of strategies to engage the audience. Okay. Third bullet point, there's already 4, is make an attempt to meet the needs of the audience. Sorry, let me just, somebody's waiting to join. No? I'm sure there was, nobody's there. Go back to that. Attempting to meet the needs of the audience or achieving the purpose of your presentation and achieving the purpose of your presentation. So these two are similar. And this is the way you respond to questions. So you listen to the questions, you feedback and provide an appropriate response in a straightforward way, or you respond formally and in some detail. And this one is that you respond elaborately with further ideas and information. Okay, so the same criteria, is just how well you present that criteria. And this is the sheet that I will be using to mark you on. Okay, and this is the sheet that will be sent to the exam board. Trying to fit it onto one screen. So really simple. I'll just put your name and your candidate number, the fact that it's recorded, and the topic that you have chosen. And then if it's a pass, I will select the criteria here, that is audible, you've used spoken standard English, you're expressing straightforward ideas, you're attempting to organize, you're attempting to meet the needs, and you're answering questions in a straightforward manner. If it's a merit, it'll be all those things that I've just discussed. Okay. And if it's a distinction, the ticks will be here. And then I will sign it and date it here. I will also let you know the following week what you've achieved, whether it's a pass, merit or distinction, but it has no bearing on your overall GCSE grade. Your GCSE is 100% exam. So it's what you do on those days in June. Okay. This is something that we just have to do as an additional for you to pass. So I don't want anyone to worry too much about it, but equally, I do want you to take it seriously. I'm going to also email you this, which is how to give a good presentation. Okay, so that would be emailed just about choosing a good subject, structuring, any visual aids, just some advice there that you can look at in your own time. And next week, what I will do is I will be showing you some students speaking and listening assessments. So we will watch them together, and you will have a copy of the mark scheme, and you will decide who gets a pass, a merit and a distinction. So we'll watch one, and then I'll say, what did you think? And you'll say, I thought that was a merit, I thought that was a distinction. And I will tell you what they actually got from the exam board, and we will discuss how far or how close you were. And we will do that for about 3 or 4, not loads, okay, just to give you an idea before you do your own. Okay, so I don't want anyone to feel like they're just being thrown in the deep end and having to do a presentation. So it will be organized in that way. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask how many minutes we need or reports
So
to finish the
approximately
discussion.
about, by the time you answer some questions as well, it should be about 8 to 10 minutes in total. So it could
Right.
be that your presentation on its own is 5 minutes, that the topic you talk about is 5 minutes. And then by the time people have asked you questions, you've got round to answering 3 questions in some detail, you know, it's about 8 minutes.
All right.
Okay.
Thank
I know
you.
5 minutes sounds like a long time when you are talking,
Yeah.
but with the question and answer session as well, it will pass before you know it. Okay. Are there any other questions on that? Okay, lovely. What?
Excuse
Oh,
me. Do we need to have a writing to show you as well, or not? It's all right.
I'm not taking anything in. You literally have to present it. So obviously it's a good idea to have it written out in front of you, have it planned and prepared, practice it a couple of times yourself with family, if you like. As long as you've got it's okay to have the notes in front of you, okay, as long as you are not reading it. So when it's recording, you should be looking straight at the camera, because that's what the examiner wants to see. And glancing down at your notes is absolutely fine. You know, having post-it notes and just reminding yourself where you're going next is absolutely fine, as long as you are not reading from a sheet of paper, because then that's a reading assessment, not a speaking one. Okay.
Thanks.
Just a question. I know I've not been a while. Just to ask, are you going to send us question that we need to develop on this PowerPoint
No,
presentation?
last week I asked everyone to come up with a topic of your choice. And this week I wanted people to have come prepared with just the subject of their topic. So an idea of what they're going to talk about, which I'm going to go through with people in a minute. If there's anyone whose topic I think actually it's going to be quite hard to meet the criteria for that, I'm going to email them separately, and I will maybe put some suggestions on, you know, maybe just changing the wording of their topic. But this week was literally just coming up with an idea. Okay, next week is going to be to look at some examples, and the week after is going to be, you know, to prepare. And then I think it'll be the 4th week that we actually present them. And it won't just be me assessing you, Graham will be in as well. So we will both assess, then we will match our marking together before I give you your feedback. So we are both sure that we marked you at the same level, and an examiner would as well. Okay. The purpose for the recording isn't any reflection on you, it's a reflection on our teaching. Are we able to assess you accurately? That's what they want to look at, basically. They're assessing us. Okay. And I will be coming up fully make-upped for those sessions that are being recorded to send off to the exam board, just so you know. So expect to see a glamorous me. Okay, so moving on to the homework then. Last week I did some work on sentences. Does everyone remember that? Simple, compound and complex sentences. If I just come back out of this, where is it gone? And I showed you a PowerPoint like this. Does this look familiar?
We can't see your.
Oh,
Did
I? Sorry. Thank you for letting me know. Otherwise I would have just gone on. Did we do this last week?
Yep.
You didn't post it for us, I do think so, but we talk about it very well.
Okay, so we talked about it. So I'm just going to do a quick whiz through. Okay, I know it seems like I'm recapping a lot of the similar things, but I just think it's so important for the marks that you get. Where is it? Sorry, I'm just looking for where. It doesn't seem to have saved my PowerPoint and all those extra things that I did. Sorry, let me just.
And why when you're talking is so easy, when we wanted to put it in practice is so hard.
I know the reality is, yeah, it's very different, isn't it? I'm really sorry about this. I don't know. I put together an entire PowerPoint and it just seems to be missing now. And this isn't the PowerPoint that I put together. I tweaked this one. Oh, okay. I know what I've done. Okay, it's fine. It's a different PowerPoint that I've done. That's why I'm confused. Where have I saved it? Okay. Okay. Here we go. So just very, very quickly then. This isn't it either. Okay, it doesn't matter. I'll just start from here. So basically, the first thing I want to talk to you about and just make very, very clear is plurals. Okay, so and I sent you a worksheet on plurals. And the first thing to note is when something is singular, and you can tell from the word, and I'm sorry if I'm patronizing, I just want to make sure it's very, very clear. It means one. Okay, so there is a door in my room, and I can't spell. Okay, one door. However, when something is plural, plural literally means there's more than one. Okay. Okay. And when there is a plural word, we just add the S. We do not have to add any other punctuation. It's just an S. Okay. So if it's singular, it's one door. For plural, we put an S on the end of the words. Okay. We do not add any punctuation. Now, last week, I talked to you a little bit about the plural rules. Okay. And this week, I have got. Sorry, I'm really thrown by this PowerPoint that I created. It's it was amazing, and now it's just disappeared. Okay. So last week we talked about plurals and we talked about regular plurals. Now, regular plurals, and I know that sounds like a fancy word, okay, are just plurals that end in an S. That's all. They just end in an S. Okay. Sometimes the spelling of the word changes, but they will always, always, always end in an S. That's why they are regular. Okay. And they still don't have an apostrophe or anything. If there's more than one, they just end in an S, and that is the rule. So if a word ends in an SS, a CH, an SH, an X, or even an S, we add ES. So for example, the word glass ends in a double S. If we say there's one glass or there's several glasses that need to be washed, we add an ES. Or the word church that ends in a CH. Okay, there's one church in this area. There are several churches in this area. When we want to say churches, we don't just add S, we add ES for plural. And again with dish, okay, there's a dish, I can't find it, or there's several dishes that are lost with an ES. And again, box, okay, we add an ES. But the point is, when it becomes a plural from a singular, it still ends in an S, okay? The second rule for plurals is that if a word ends in an F or an FE, we cross out the F and the FE and we add VES. So for example, half, okay, I'll go halves with you. If we say that, we cross out the F and we add VES. Or he's had, 3 wives. Okay, we cross out the FE and we add the VES. Same with knife. I don't know if it will let me add it in here. If I write the word knife, okay, and I want to write it in plurals, I cross out the FE and I put VES. Okay, but again, same plural rule, it ends in an S. Okay, we don't need to add any punctuation. The other issue is, not issue, but the other thing is if a word ends in a consonant and a Y, and if it ends in a vowel and a Y. So very quickly, and this was on my other PowerPoint, okay, very quickly, how many letters are there in the alphabet? Anybody?
26.
There's 26 letters in the alphabet. Okay. And those letters, some of them are known as consonants, and some of those are known as vowels. Does anybody know how many vowels we have?
5.
5.
Good. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. And anyone know what they are?
A, E,
Um,
I, O, U.
Yeah. So, and the other 21 letters of the alphabet are known as consonants. So before we can do plurals, this is important to know. So A, E, I, O, U are the vowels. So B, C, D, F, G, H, all the other 21 letters are consonants. So going back to plurals then, if a word ends in a Y, but the letter before the Y is a consonant, which means it's anything other than A, E, I, O, U. So it ends with a TY or LY or an SY or a BY. And remember, it's about the letter before the Y. We cross out the Y and we add IES. So for example, baby, the letter before the Y is a B. That is a consonant. So I cross out the Y and I add IES. Okay. Another one, for example, could be, let's have a look. Let me just think. It could be country. Okay. And if I want to say countries, I spell it the same, but I cross out the Y and I add IES for plural. Okay. However, or if it's sky and I say skies, I cross out the Y and I add an IES because the letter before the Y is a consonant. Okay, and that letter before the Y, if it's a consonant, we always get rid of the Y and we add IES. But if the word, and this is only for Y words, okay, if a word ends in a Y and the letter before it is a vowel, like E, A, O, U, we only add an S. Okay, so for example, if I show you, so for example, the word toy, okay, the letter before the Y is an O, so that just literally becomes toys with an S. Or the word buy, sorry, the letter before the Y is a U, okay, so we just add in S, okay. Days, the letter before the Y is an A, we literally put. And sometimes people make mistakes. It's easy to do, but the spelling will usually tell you whether you're right or wrong. So for example, if you forget the Y rule and you think, oh, it's IES, and you put TO for toys, IES, by getting rid of the Ys, you can see that that looks wrong. That doesn't look like toys at all. Okay, so that should give you a good indication. So if a word ends in a Y and the letter before it is a vowel, you literally just add S. Okay, so for example, donkey, the letter before the Y is an E, we just add an S. You wouldn't change the Y and add IES because otherwise donkeys would look like this. And if you look at that, it just looks wrong. Okay, and then there are irregular plurals, which I'm going to come do with you. So you have got this worksheet just as a reminder of how some plural spellings change. Okay, before you can do apostrophes, you need to be aware of that. Okay, now regular plurals, like we said, are just words that end in an S. Okay, regular plurals. Irregular plurals, okay, are words that don't end in an S. So there's singular and there are multiple. So if there is one dog and this is his lead, okay, and if there's several dogs and these leads belong to them, you only use an apostrophe for possession if something belongs, never for plural. Okay, so if you're just literally talking about more than one, you don't need an apostrophe, but you only need apostrophe for possession if something belongs. Like the lead belongs to the dog, the knob belongs to the door, the remote belongs to the television, the den belongs to the fox, the flags belong to these countries, the meal belongs to the dwarf, the bottle belongs to the baby. Okay, but if it's irregular, okay, plural, the word does not end in an S. That's what irregular means. Okay, so for child changes to children, and the word children does not end in an S. The word person becomes people in plural, doesn't end in an S. Man becomes men, woman becomes women, tooth becomes teeth. None of them end in an S. That's the point. So when you add an apostrophe for possession, you're talking about the children's party or the children's birthday cake or the children's clothes, they all belong to the children. You have to put the apostrophe first, then the S, just like you would do for singular. It's the same rule. Okay. The only time you put an apostrophe after the S is if there are multiple dogs, because plural comes first. If there are lots of countries, because plural comes first. Okay. And then you get some words that don't change at all, like deer, sheep, fish. They are singular and plural. Okay. And then you get the its versus its. So this its with an apostrophe S literally means it is or it has. Okay. And this it refers to an object. And the most easiest, simplest way to work it out is to say it as it is. So for example, it's my birthday. It is my birthday. Well, I know it is, so it's an apostrophe. It's a lovely house. It is a lovely house. Yep, that fits. It's with the apostrophe. But if I look at this one, the council held its meeting yesterday. And if I read that, the council held it is meeting yesterday. But it is doesn't make sense. So it can only be the it's without an apostrophe. Because if it has an apostrophe in it, it means it is. And this word it is does not fit here. It doesn't make sense. Okay, the council held it is meeting yesterday. So it can't be that one. Or the dog wagged it is tail. Doesn't fit. The parrot damaged it is beak. Okay, or the shop shut its shutter. You couldn't say the shop shut it is shutter. Okay, so that's why it would not be any of those. It has to be this it's. It's only this it's if you're trying to say it is or it has. For example, it's a beautiful house. It's got lots of bedrooms. It is a beautiful house. It has lots of bedrooms. So it would be this it's both times. Okay. On the whole, it is this it's. Sometimes it's this one. But just always read the sentence through to yourself in your head with these words. And if they fit, then you know an apostrophe goes in there. If they do not fit the sentence, then you know there should be no apostrophe. Okay. So simple, compound and complex sentences then. Okay. I know we did a bit on simple, compound and complex last week, but not in a lot of detail. So did I do this PowerPoint with you? This specific PowerPoint?
If you scroll down a little bit, maybe I can't
The
remember.
previous page, this one we saw.
You did see this one?
Yeah, this one, yeah.
Yeah, you did. Okay. So you saw this, Tim walked through the park, Rebecca ran for her train. You saw all of this. Okay, brilliant. Okay, that's brilliant. Saves me a massive job then. And we talked about compound sentences with the
Yes.
buts. And we talked about how you can
Yeah.
change the but, put semicolon in there. Lovely. Okay.
Yes.
Fantastic. All right, that's great, actually. Okay, and we talked about not being independent clauses.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. This is not the PowerPoint that I had done. And my PowerPoint has disappeared somewhere. Right, that's fine then. So just want to do a little bit more work on compound sentences then, complex sentences. Okay. So we know that every sentence has a simple sentence in it to make sense. It has a subject, a verb, and an object. Okay. But a complex sentence will have a dependent clause. So basically, if you think of yourself as independent, we are all adults. Okay, we can go shopping ourselves, we can take care of ourselves, we can drive, we can work if we choose to, we can look after other people if we need to. We are independent, we don't rely on anybody else. Okay, but if you think of somebody who's dependent, that would be like a child, your children perhaps. So somebody who cannot go shopping for themselves, cannot look after themselves, who needs somebody else, who relies on somebody else. And that's what a complex sentence has in it. It has an independent clause, an independent sentence, which is one simple sentence that stands alone. But it has another part to that sentence, a part of the sentence that doesn't make sense on its own, that needs the independent part. So for example, if I go back to this, okay, and if I show you this PowerPoint, although it was raining does not make sense on its own. This is dependent on the rest of the sentence. This part is independent. It makes complete sense. I went for a walk in the park. I is the subject, went is the verb, park is the object. Okay, this is just extra information and it's dependent on this. So a complex sentence will have an independent clause and a dependent clause. Okay. And the reason why a complex sentence is complex is because you can switch it around. You can have the dependent part at the front and the independent part at the end, or you can do it this way. Okay, I went for a walk in the park although it was raining, and you can end your sentence that way. That's why it's complex. The dependent can be at the end or it can be at the beginning. And again, I can do the same for this one. Despite the hot weather, she ran for over 20 miles. I can take that and I can say, I can put the main part at the beginning. She ran for 20 miles despite the hot weather. Okay, and that's why they are complex, because the dependent clause can go at the beginning or it can go at the end. It doesn't matter as long as there is a comma to separate the two. Okay, and when you have one main and one dependent, one main and one dependent, you should only have one comma. Okay, so that's the first thing to be aware of. Do you know, I'm really gutted about my PowerPoint. I know I keep going on about it, but it had everything that I needed to talk to you about, and I don't think I've saved it, and I've turned off my laptop. So, although I love football, I don't like watching games live. Okay, we know there's two parts to this sentence. Although I love football is the dependent clause. It needs the rest of this sentence to make sense, which is I don't like watching games live. Okay, I is a subject. We said every sentence needs a subject. It needs a verb. Okay, and sometimes there's an object, but it has to make sense. This is the part that makes sense on its own. This is the part that doesn't. Okay, this is just extra information. Nobody needs to know that I love football. Okay, it's irrelevant. The important part of that sentence is I don't like watching football games live. Okay, it makes complete sense on its own. Okay, so a complex sentence has a simple sentence that makes sense on its own, which is the independent sentence, which is the you and I part, and it has a dependent part, an additional part of the sentence that just adds more information. So for example, Joe grabbed the tightrope is a main sentence. It makes sense on its own because it's a simple sentence. Joe is the subject. What she did is grab, and the object she grabbed is the tightrope. But you're in an exam for GCSE. You're writing too many simple sentences and compound sentences. So you want to mix it up a bit with a complex sentence. So this basic sentence could have more detail added to it by using, I've called it a subordinate clause here. I mean a dependent. So you could put, as the crowd roared, Joe grabbed the tightrope. Okay, Joe grabbed the tightrope is still my main part of that sentence. It's got the subject, the verb, and the object. As the crowd roared is the dependent part. It does not make sense on its own. It needs this to make sense. And I've separated the two with a comma. Okay. And again, it's complex, okay, because I could write it the other way around. I could write Joe grabbed the tightrope, comma, as the crowd roared. It can be done either way. Another example. While the children were working quietly, Miss Jeffrey was surfing the internet. Okay, naughty Miss Jeffrey. So Miss Jeffrey was surfing the internet is the main part of the sentence. It makes complete sense on its own because Miss Jeffrey is a subject and what she was doing was surfing. That while the children were working quietly is the subordinate part. It does not make sense on its own. It depends on this part. So the main and the so the independent and the dependent part are separated by a comma. Okay, and I've highlighted the comma there in white. You could also say it the other way round. That's why it's a complex sentence. You can have the main part at the beginning. Miss Jeffrey was surfing the internet, comma, while the children were working quietly. The comma would go after the main. Okay, but they're complex sentences because they can be written either way. Okay. Another way to identify, so you might think to yourself, okay, Roxana, you're telling me one part is a main part, and I know that because it's a simple sentence, and the other part is just extra information. But how do I know when to put the comma in? Usually an indication is, okay, a natural division will occur when the first part of the sentence begins with these words, when, as, soon as, if, as, just as, while, before, and after. So when this happens, you should put a comma between the two parts of the sentence. Okay, and one will be the main and the other the subordinate, the dependent. So for example, when I went to the party, I had so much fun. That's wrong because it's missing a comma. Becomes when I went to the party, comma, I had so much fun. And you know that because the sentence starts with when, okay, or although. So here's some examples. Notice where the comma is. Although it was late, we waited patiently for the last bus. Which is the main part of that sentence? Which is the independent part?
We
We
waited patiently.
for the bus.
Brilliant. Okay, it's simple because it's got the subject we, and what you did was wait. The object you waited for the bus. And you can start to see where the dependent clauses are because they usually start with a connecting word like although or as or when or before. The questionnaire is blank, so you can fill it in on your own. Where's the main part of that sentence?
The questionnaire is blank.
Yes, absolutely. Some of you might say, well, this part's got the subject, you can fill it in, and that's the verb as well. But it's also got the word so, and the comma always goes before the so. Okay, so that would be your main. As long as we were sitting down, I felt cold.
I felt
Or
cold.
fast go.
Yeah. The fact that you're sitting down while you're feeling cold doesn't matter. The point is you felt cold. As the chemicals mix, the oxygen is released.
The oxygen is released.
Absolutely. Yeah. Laughing like a hyena, Jim sat up.
Jim sat
Jim
up.
sat up.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Amazed by the publicity, the twins arrived in Cannes.
The twins
The
arrived in
twin.
Cannes.
Yeah. And you can just see that these parts just don't make sense. They don't always have as, okay, or so, or although, or when, or before, okay, but they won't make sense on their own. Even though he was scared, Mark laughed at the clowns.
Mark laughed at the
Lovely. Now, that seems quite straightforward, but the difficult part comes when the independent clause is separated, okay, and the less important information, so the dependent part, is put in the middle. So if you look at this one, okay, sorry, if you can just mute yourselves. I know I was asking you questions and you've unmuted. Thank you. So if you look at this one, the car, which was on its last legs, ground to a halt. Okay. Now, because the dependent part is in the middle, it means the independent part has been separated. And when that happens, we have two commas. And that is the only time you would have two commas. If you find that you have got more than two commas in a sentence, that's not a list, then you need to full stop somewhere. So the car, which was on its last legs, ground to a halt. So you need to just think to yourself, what is this sentence about? Who is the subject? The car. And what is the verb? What did it do? It ground to a halt, which means it came to a halt. This part, which was on its last legs, is just additional information. We don't need to know the car was on its last legs. The fact that it's come to a halt suggests that it was on its way out anyway. So when a dependent clause is in the middle, there are two commas, one to separate the subject and one to separate the dependent clause. And the independent, okay, comes at the beginning and the end. This is why they are complex sentences. They can be written in three ways, with the main sentence at the beginning, or the main sentence at the end, or the main sentence at the beginning and the end, like here. And usually a good way to check is the embedded clause, the embedded part, the dependent part, usually has a which if it's in the middle. The car, which was on its last legs, ground to a halt. Or Simon, who had completed his assignment, waited at the bus stop. This sentence is about Simon, who was waiting at the bus stop. The fact that he completed his assignment is just additional information. It's got nothing to do with what he's doing now, waiting at the bus stop, but it just creates a complex sentence with more information. Or the sunlight bursting through the window woke Jim up. Again, you might say to me, well, Roxana, there's no which in there, there's no who in there. How do we know this is the dependent part? Because you look, the sunlight woke Jim up. The subject is the sunlight. What did it do? It woke the object up. The fact that it was bursting through the window is obvious because if it's woken Jim up, of course it's coming through. How else would it wake him up? It's just additional information. Okay. Or the car smashed in at the back made it to the finishing line. The main sentence there is the car made it to the finishing line. The fact that it was smashed in at the back is just additional information. Okay.
Roxana, I have a question. So if
Yeah.
you go back to the previous slide, example number 2, and there you have used the word so. So if there's word like so yet, because so you have got a connecting word. It is important to mark it with a comma because it does have so in between.
Yes. You always put a comma before the word so. That is a grammatical thing. You would always use so. Not necessarily for because or and or but. Okay. But you would always put a comma for so.
And just so, not before yet as well. How about yet?
Always for so.
Okay.
It depends on the context of the sentence, and I will go through that with you. This is where it becomes really, really complicated. It depends whether both parts of the sentence are independent clauses. If both
Okay.
parts of the sentence are independent clauses, you can put a comma in, but you will not be penalized for not putting one in.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I will go through that at another session because I don't want to bombard people too much. So we
Okay.
did this one. Just trying to. Okay. And the last rule for commas is you use them to separate items in a list. Okay. So for example, for lunch today I had, and you can see because I've got a list, I've got my colons, and then you use the comma to separate the items. A cheese sandwich, comma, a packet of crisps, a fruit shoe, but no comma here because we've got the word and. Okay. And that was another a list one. So just to go back to the homework then from last week. Okay, I just want to quickly go through, I think it was this one. Nope, it wasn't this one. Okay, this was one of the homework sheets. Okay, so I'm just going to very, very quickly put the commas in. I just want you to check your own, make sure you've done them right. Hopefully after another explanation this lesson, it might be more clearer. So remember, we always have a independent part. Okay. And we always have a dependent. And it doesn't matter which one comes first as long as a comma separates the two. Okay, so this one was quite straightforward because it was independent at the beginning and dependent at the end, or dependent at the beginning and independent at the end. There wasn't any embedded ones here. So in 5 minutes time, David will get home.
Before David, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just going to put the commas in. I want you to check your work. And if you've got something different, I want you to ask me about it. Okay, otherwise just correct your own. On Wednesday, Sarah will be going shopping. Sarah will be going shopping is the independent. Subject, verb. Okay. Suddenly, Mark jumped out. That should say out, not but. Out from behind a bush, it would be here. Okay. Mark jumped out from behind a bush is the main subject. The fact that he did it suddenly is irrelevant. So dependent clauses can be just one word as well. Okay. They don't need to be 3 or 4 words or nearly a whole sentence. On the right, you can see the Houses of Parliament. Okay, on the right is additional information, the fact that you can see the Houses of Parliament. Soon, it will be time to go out to play. In the distance, the trees waved in the wind, and you can see this is our independence on the ends. Before the sun came up, he woke up to get ready. Without warning, Aaron collapsed to the ground. Back at the house, Mike was preparing dinner. Wherever they went, the sun seemed to follow. Okay, and this was a, oh, that's not it. Quietly panting, Joe finished his race. Twice a year, the clocks change by an hour. Without a sound, Rob crept out of the house. In the living room, there is a Christmas tree. And you can see all the independents seem to be at the end. But if we were to rewrite them, okay, they were still, you could change most of them. You could change the independent to put it at the beginning and the dependent at the end. Okay. The second sheet that you had was a little bit more complicated. It was this one. Is this correct? Does this look familiar to people?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So this one had a mixture of commas for lists and it had a mixture of commas for embedded clauses. Okay, so I will again put the commas in where they need to go. I'll explain each one as I go through. If you've got something different, then please ask me. Okay, so can you call at the chemist, newsagent and post office? And we put it here because this is a comma for a list. There's only one. Can you call at the chemist, newsagent and post office this afternoon? A list of places to pop into. My son, who passed his piano exam last week, will be playing in the concert this weekend. There is 2 commas here because the independent is separated and the main is embedded. Okay, so my son, comma, who passed his exam last week, comma, will be playing in the concert this weekend because the sentence is about my son and what he will be doing is playing in the concert. The fact that he passed his exam last week is extra information. Okay, and again, usually you can indicate if it's a dependent clause because it starts with who, if it's embedded. Okay, Shabir can speak Urdu, Arabic, English, and Spanish. 2 commas here to separate the list of the things he can speak. Urdu, Arabic, English, and we do not put a comma here because we've got the word and. This sentence is about 2 subjects, Peter and Lisa. Peter and Lisa, who are students at Atherton College, are both taking exams in history, geography, and English. 3 commas here, okay, because this has got a comma for a list and it's got a comma to separate an embedded clause. So Peter and Lisa, they are who the sentences are about. The fact that they are students at Atherton College is extra information because the sentence is that Peter and Lisa are taking exams. That's what they're doing. That's what the main part of the sentence is. And they're taking them in history, comma, geography and English because this is a list of their subjects. Okay, so there's 3 commas there. Peter and Lisa are taking exams in history. The fact that they are students at Atherton College is just extra information. Okay, the independent sentence doesn't need it. Okay, but it just tells us. And again, this has got the word who in it, just to give us a little indication. Number 5, you couldn't read. So if you managed to do that, well done. I'm not going to even attempt it. Number 6, you could order this car in maroon, black, blue, or white. 2 commas again for our list. Okay, not 3 because we don't need 1 for or. It's the same as and. Number 8, the school fund made £85 in January, comma, 130 in February, comma, 90 in March and 250 in April because it's listing when they made the funds. Okay, another one here, 3 commas. The gardener planted some bulbs, is what the gardener did, chopped down some large fir trees, weeded out the borders, pruned the roses and repaired the side fence. Okay, we've got our 3 commas there to separate the items of things that the gardener did. These are the things he did. Okay, we've got another embedded clause here. Our dog, a golden retriever, had to go to the vet for her yearly injections last week. Okay, so you can't find this main clause. Our dog, a golden retriever, is not a main. Okay, it's not an independent either. Okay, so you would say our dog had to go to the vet for her yearly injection. Okay, subject is the dog, and what the dog had to do was go to the vet. Okay, the fact that that dog is a golden retriever is additional information. It's not needed. There is no who there. There is no which. Okay, but it's additional information. So you need to read the sentences and make sure when you're writing your own complex sentences, you are doing that. Okay, you must write and thank your cousin, your brother-in-law, your uncle and your grandma for their help. And this is again commas for a list. And the last one is a combination of both. The postman, comma, who had worked in Aberdeen for many years, comma, retired last week. Because the point is the postman retired. The extra information is that he had worked in Aberdeen for many years. We don't need to know that he's retired. We can assume that he's worked for many years if he's retired already. Okay, and he was presented with a picture of his village, comma, some gardening tools and a check. Okay, are there any questions about that? Okay, good. So this week's homework, again on punctuation, she said, if I can find it. Okay, if you have got your head round using commas, okay, dashes, brackets, and commas are used for the same reasons. Okay, so let me quickly go through this. This is a sheet, another worksheet on commas. Again, it's got some examples for you, which I want you to read, and then I want you to complete the activities. Okay, so it's got the main clause for you here. I want you to add a comma and then a dependent clause using these words. Okay, and then the same here. And then this one at the bottom is just the really, really easy one, is commas in a list. Okay, and again, you just do this on the worksheet. You can do it on your computer. You don't have to print it out. Okay, so wherever there is a comma, I've traveled to Spain, France, Italy, and Sweden, you'd put the comma in. Okay, that's simply it. Now, that's the comma sheet. The brackets one, okay, looks like this. And it's, once you know commas, it's so easy because basically you add the brackets around the extra information. Okay, so if you would put a comma there, you can take out the comma and add a bracket. So for example, brackets mark off part of a sentence giving extra information that is not vital to the meaning of the sentence. It can also be used to provide extra information. So for example, if we look at this one, okay, our dog, I could put a golden retriever in brackets here because that's just extra information. Okay, our dog had to go to the vet for her yearly injections. So when you're doing your writing exam, yes, you've got to use commas to separate subordinate clauses, but then you might come to a point you think, okay, I want to show the examiner I know how to use brackets and dashes. Well, you find somewhere where you have used a comma to separate an embedded clause and you put the bracket around that. Okay, it wouldn't work in a list. It does not work for items in a list, but it does work here. Peter and Lucy, who are students at Atherton College, are both taking exams in history, geography, and English. You cannot use brackets every time you need a comma. You have to use commas all the time, but you can use 1 or 2 brackets in your writing to show the examiner that you know how to use them. That's the point. Okay. So anywhere you would add a comma, you can use brackets. So let's do this first one together. 4 of the boats in the race, Curlew, Crows, Puffin, and Eagle, ran aground. Where could we put the brackets here? What's the main part of the sentence?
4 of
Could
the
we
boats
have it
in
no
the
bit zoom
race.
in, if that's possible?
The main clause.
Or the boats.
Right, but that's not the complete main clause, is it? 4 of the main boats in the race. What did they do? That's the ran aground. Thank you. So if that's part of your main and that's the rest of your main, okay, a comma doesn't fit here, but you could just put the names of those in brackets. So 4 of the boats in the race, Curlew, Grouse, Puffin, and Eagle, ran aground. Okay, so wherever there is additional information. The Mercedes, in my view, the finest make of a car, can cruise effortlessly. So in these examples, it's like an embedded clause. The main is separated from at the beginning and at the end. The additional information with brackets is in the middle. So you need to make sure you can identify where the additional information goes and add the brackets. Okay. So there's that sheet. You can just do it on here yourself. And there's also this one. Okay. Ellie, my older sister, lives in Manchester. Again, the brackets are for the embedded sections. And then you're probably thinking that, and there's and then dashes work in exactly the same way. Okay, the teacher had a strategy which will provide results. You could put a comma there, okay, or you could add a dash. They made it finally. The entire school, students, staff, and parents were present. You could put a bracket there, or you could put a comma there. Okay, the point is that brackets, commas, and dashes work in the same way. Okay, you would use commas the majority of the time, but just to show the examiner you would use brackets a couple of times and at least 1 dash. Okay, and again, you just add the dashes into these sentences where you would put them. Think to yourself, where could I put a comma or where could I put a bracket? That's where the dash goes. And if you're not sure, the rules are here. Okay, they are really, really simple to use if you understand the rules. Okay, so give that a go for homework this week. Is everyone okay with that? Yes? No?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I will
Yes.
send it at the end of the lesson. I didn't want to send it before because I'm going to send it in a email that just says homework. Okay. So there's a commas revision, there's a dashes, and there is a brackets. You won't know how well you know them until you do them. Okay. So
Roxana,
please
can I
do give them a
disappear for a
try.
few seconds if that's
Of
possible,
course.
please?
Yes,
Thanks.
of course. Okay, so now it's taken us an hour to do punctuation, but that's fine because it's just as important. I want to go back to this week's session. So I got most people's homework on the red room. Thank you very much. I am still waiting on Leila, who's just left, and Mehek. Which I know I've spoken to you about and you're going to get it to me at some point. But for everybody else, I just wanted to give you some feedback on the red room. Because we're at the stage now with structure where you seem to understand structure and it happens always, it's not just you guys, it's every year it happens. People tend to regress from their understanding of structure to suddenly answering a language question. Okay, and it happens all the time. Because what they do is then they start commenting on, the fact that there is the senses, you can hear the creak, the onomatopoeia, okay, the repetition of more, and they start focusing on language, okay, and the use of the adjectives and the decaying yellow teeth. But what we've got to do is we've got to focus on structure. So how has the writer started? And the hard thing is that when you're commenting on structure, you still have to give quotes. So some of the quotes you're using might be language quotes, and that's where the confusion occurs. So don't blame yourselves or think you're doing anything wrong. Just know that it's so difficult to distinguish the two, because you have to do what you need to do in language but apply it to structure. So let's have a look at this. Let's have a quick read, and I'll go through it with you. I heard the faint sound of a stick and a shambling step on the flags in the passage outside. The door creaked on its hinges as a second old man entered, more bent, more wrinkled, more aged even than the first. He supported himself by the help of a crutch. His eyes were covered by a shade, and his lower lip, half averted, hung pale and pink from his decaying yellow teeth. He made straight for an armchair on the opposite side of the table, sat down clumsily and began to cough. The man with the withered hand gave the newcomer a short glance of positive dislike. The old woman took no notice of his arrival, but remained with her eyes fixed steadily on the fire. Okay, so how has the writer structured this to interest us? So many ways. So many ways. The first way is that you hear the sound of a stick, you hear the noise before you see anybody. Okay, it's also written in the first person, I. Who is this I? We have no idea, but he describes hearing something. When the door opens, and the fact that it creaks suggests that this is an unusual place, perhaps a haunted place. It creates mystery for the reader. We want to know more, want to know what's going on. Then it tells us a second old man entered. That's part of the structure, because that tells us that there's already an old man in there. There must be a first old man in there for a second old man to have appeared. Okay, so again, creates mystery, creates suspense. Okay, then the focus changes from the sounds, the sound of a stick and the door creaking. The focus changes to a description now, and we get this repetition of the word more. Okay, to add emphasis to the age of these newcomers, and this is all in the eyes of our narrator, the I. We don't know who he is. Okay, he hasn't told us anything about himself. Okay, so the repetition of the word more suggests that, you know, these are aged people. Okay, the description, the focus then moves on to a description of him, from the sound to the description, and the description is one of dislike. All the ways he's described, that his lip is half averted, it's pale, it's pink, it's decaying yellow teeth, they are deliberately words that make us dislike him. Okay, he's made straight for the armchair, sat down clumsily and began to cough. Okay, links to the fact that he's old, not really relevant. Then the man with the withered hand gave the newcomer a short glance of positive dislike. The focus changes from this second old man to the first old man. We assume, okay, because if he's a second, there must be a first. And the man with the withered hand gave the newcomer a short glance of positive dislike. And then we learn the focus changes again. And then as readers, we learn there's an old woman in there. Okay, but we get all of this from the perspective of the I. And we don't see the I. He is only describing a second old man, a first old man, and an old woman. Okay, and the fact that the man with the withered hand, which is the first old man, gave the newcomer a short glance of positive dislike, that's the narrator's opinion. Can we trust it? He might have just glanced at it, but we're only hearing from a first person narrative, which means that the narrator is not reliable. When it's a third person, he, she, you know, the man, that's different. But when it's an I who's given us a description, that's when the narrative can become unreliable. Okay, so a question from the exam is always written like this. It will say this text is from the opening of a story or the middle of a story or the end of a story. Okay, how has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? What the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning, how and why the writer changes his focus as the source develops, any other structural features that interest you. And I have said, use these as your opening paragraphs. First paragraph, second paragraph, third paragraph. What we're going to talk about? Well, how we're introduced first to sound by a narrator. Okay, then the focus moves to a second old man and a description of him and he's described quite negatively. Okay, then there's another focus to a first old man and an old woman. Okay, but we are left with as many questions as we started. Why are they all here? Who are they? Okay, so this is all the stuff that I got down. Again, I'll send you this PowerPoint. Okay, starts in the first person I, which makes the reader experience the scene as if we are there. It does not tell us who was watching the scene, which means it could be anyone. Okay, then we hear before we see. We hear the faint sound of a stick and a shambling step. That creates interest as we wait to see who arrives. The door creaked on its hinges. Again, the onomatopoeia sound creates mystery and suspense. The second man informs us as readers that someone else is there already, a first man we haven't heard from or seen. That creates interest. And this man, this second man is more. He's more bent, he's more wrinkled, he's more whatever else than the first man. Okay, then there's a shift from sight to sound. Sorry, there's a shift from sound to sight. We see him now. Okay, and the writer slows down the action by using the repetition of the word more, more, more. And it's, if you look at the sentence, if I go back to, the sentence, if I can find it, okay, look how long it is. Okay, it's really, really long. And then if you look at the next sentence, it's really, really long. And what the writer is almost doing is, with the use of the long sentences, he's almost mimicking how long and how slow this old man is, how long it's taken him to get to his seat, how slow he is at getting his seat. The sentence goes on just as if the man, the second old man, the distance from the door to the chair goes on for him. Because when you're old and frail and walking can take a long time, and it can seem like a huge effort. The fact that he sat down clumsily, okay, doesn't mean that he's clumsy. It just means that he's probably exhausted by the point he's got, by the time he's got to his seat. Okay, but the fact that there is a long sentence again links to the structure. Okay, a visual description of his lower lip, half averted, hung pale from his decaying teeth, gives us an unpleasant image. It adds to the mystifying atmosphere. Okay, we now get to see as well as hear. Then there's a focus. The focus shifts again to other characters. This time is a man with a withered hand and the old lady. By switching the focus, it makes us more interested in the first character, because we don't know who the I is and why he's there, where he is, or who all these people are around him. The fact that he notices the age of these people, and they're old and they're withered and they're taking a long time to sit down, might indicate to us as readers that he's young himself. The I is young. Okay, the use of the positive dislike makes us feel uncomfortable, because it's difficult to imagine how something that causes dislike can be a positive thing. There's that juxtaposition there. It keeps the suspense alive. And again, like I said, the long sentence mimics the slow pace of the opening and the slow movements of the elderly man. And all of those link to structure. So structure is hard because the temptation is to talk about language, because you still have to talk about quotes. You still have to bring quotes in, but you always focus on what has the writer started with. It started with what we can hear rather than what we can see. Why? It builds up suspense and mystery. Then we get a description of what we can see. The focus changes. Why? Why has the writer included this? How does it make us as readers feel? Then what is the shift on? Is a shift on a different person? Is a shift on a description of a room? Is a shift change to a conversation, a dialogue? Because that is also structural. Okay, so it's about being able to read something and picking out the way it's written, not just what is written. Okay, is everyone okay with that?
Yeah,
Roxana?
ask?
Yes.
Yes.
So yeah, of course, ask. So Mehek, you had a question to ask?
Yeah, so the first person narrative, could it be more reliable? Because this is not the information from somebody else. This is information that the person is witnessing himself.
But it's a first person narrative and he might be biased. So we can't rely on him to be an omnipotent narrator. An omnipotent narrator is in the third person, where the narrator would focus on everything in general. When a narration is the first person, we always have to be skeptical because it could be one-sided.
Okay.
Is that like exaggeration, or like because it's only like his opinion or her opinion?
He could be, yeah. And what it means to us as readers is that we have to be careful with how much we take at face value, because yes, he might have exaggerated it, but we don't know. So it's just a thing to be aware of. Okay,
It's more
I have got
biased, yeah. It's more biased.
it's more it could be more biased, absolutely. So here's one I did earlier for you because I thought that question might come up. Okay, so it will have, every text will have a narrative voice. Okay, and you will need narrative voice for question 3 structure, but also for question 4 as well, which we're going to look at today. So narrative voice is the perspective the story is told from. The writer chooses a narrative voice carefully, and it can have an important effect on the story and the reader's response. So the red room, the narrative voice in the red room is the first person. And this is a character in the story is telling us the story. Okay, and we get personal pronouns like I, my, me, we. We don't get any of these, but it starts off with I heard. And that's the only indication that this is a first person narrative. Okay, and there's an example here. A second person narrative, this is not commonly used at all. The personal pronouns are you and your. The second person you is used. So I watched as the boat sank is a first person. You watch as the boat slowly sinks. You feel relief mixed with grief. You turn and take the rudder. It's very, very rare. You do not get second person narratives, but I've put it there. A third person narrative is a third person story. Sorry, the story is being told by the voice of someone who is not a character in the story. The main personal pronouns used are she, he, and they. So, for example, George watched as the boat slowly sank. He felt relief mixed with guilt. He turned to take the rudder, pushing away the thoughts that crawled like ants into his mind. So you can assume the narrator, the third person narrator, is the actual story writer. It's the author. Okay, because it's not from George's point of view. Otherwise, it would say I. Third person omniscient. Okay, the story is told by a voice who shows they know more than their characters. And this is really, really tricky. Okay, so it's almost like you get a flashback. So I'll give you an example. The narrator is all knowing. The main pronouns still used are she, he, or they. So for example, George watched as the boat sank. He felt relief mixed with guilt. Same. 6 miles away, a group of fishermen watched the horizon looking for signs of the storm they could feel in the air. So this part is example of an omniscient narrator, because here we just get the fact that George watched the boat sink. He felt relief. He turned to take the rudder, pushing away the thoughts that crawled like ants into his mind. But in an omniscient narrator, we know that a thunderstorm is coming, and we know that George is going to get stuck in it before George himself knows. Does that make sense? The next sentence here could be George heard the storm, but the point is we knew it was coming before he did, because the narrators told us. Okay. So when thinking about a narrative voice, think about the following. How does the reader feel about the narrator? Does the reader trust the narrator? Do they seem reliable? Is the voice of the narrator the author or somebody else? Okay, and generally, as a rule, you should always be skeptical of a first person narrative, because I is always biased. Okay, you might not have evidence of it, so you can't say that. Okay, but you can look out for hints of bias as soon as you know it's a first person narrative. Okay. And I will email this resource to you as well. I don't think I have already.
Thanks.
Now, paper 1, question 4 then, okay, it is worth the most marks in the paper, in the exam. Question 1, 2, and 3 together are worth 20 marks. Question 1 is 4, question 2 is 8, question 3 is 8. Okay, that's 20 marks. This question on its own is worth 20. So my advice to you, and I say this every year, but people never do it, is the amount of time that you spend on question 1, 2, and 3 should equal the amount of time you spend on question 4. What people tend to do is they spend loads of time on the language question, which is only worth 8 marks. They spend loads of time on the structure question, which again is only worth 8 marks. Then they look at their time and they think, oh, I've only got 6 minutes to write question 4, but this is worth 20 marks. This is where the main focus of your time should be. Half of your exam should be focused on this. And if you can get your timing right, you will get the grades. It is all about the timing. It's all about keeping an eye on the clock and thinking, right, I've done my 10 minutes on language. I haven't finished, but I've run out of time. I've got to move on, and forcing yourself to move on to the structure question. Do your 10 minutes. You haven't finished, move on. Do your question 4. Question's nice and easy. I've done this within 15 minutes. I've still got 5 minutes left. Let me go back to question 2 and add another couple of sentences to round it off. Let me go back to question 3 and add a couple of sentences to round it off, because I know I've got a strong question 4 and that's worth 20 marks. Okay. So you are more likely to get more marks on question 4 because it's easier to get them, because there's such a wide capacity of marks. So question 4 then, okay, it's 20 marks. You should spend about 22 minutes of your hour on it. Okay, the question will always be the same, but again, it depends on the text. So this question will ask you to look at areas such as the character, a relationship, a theme, a setting, and it will ask you to evaluate how successfully they have been presented. So you have to give your opinion, you know, but you have to use evidence from the text. Okay, and evidence from the text is a quote. So for example, they might ask you a question like this: the writer describes the characters so vividly, we feel like we know them personally. How far do you agree? So you would then have to evaluate this comment, the quote that they've given you. Do you feel like the characters are described vividly? Do you feel like you know them personally? Most of the time, they want you to say yes. Okay, so think back to texts like Scott and Simpson at the start of the year in their walks. Think about Lullaby, where you had to give your opinion supported by appropriate textual evidence. Okay, so what do we mean by evaluate? What we mean is, are you for or against it? You come up with a conclusion, you weigh it up, you decide, you base it on the evidence. Okay, so the writer describes the characters so vividly we feel like we know them personally. How far do you agree? I agree with this statement because. That's how you start. Or I disagree with this statement because. Then you go in there and you say why you disagree. Because the language isn't clear enough. Because the structure suggests. Because the narrator doesn't indicate in full detail about. So this is how the marks are separated. 1 to 5 marks means that your answer is simple and limited. 6 to 10 marks, or half the marks, are some comments, some attempt at evaluating, some textual references, some response to focus of the question. Whereas 11 to 15 is that your response is clear, it's relevant. Okay, there's a clear understanding of the methods used. There's relevant textual references. There's a clear focus on the actual question. You keep coming back to it. And then again, your 16 to 20 is that your response is critical, it's detailed. Remember, you're giving an evaluation, you're giving a summary, you're giving a judgment, you're for it or against it, and you're saying why you're for it. Okay, a critical and detailed evaluation. You've got a perceptive understanding of the method, okay, and the range of the details, a convincing focus on the question. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, before I start looking at the student book, I might not even do that this week. I emailed you all a question 4 handout. Okay, have you all got a copy of that?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to talk you through this worksheet because what it is a question, okay, it's a text, and then there is a sample answer, okay, because I thought the best way to do a question 4 is to show you what a question 4 response looks like. And then we can revisit the textbook. And next week, we're going to do a question 4 answer on Alex Cold and the extract on Alex Cold. And we're going to, and I'll show you what the question is. And you will have 20 minutes of writing time to write me a 20-mark answer next week. Okay. But for this week, I want to focus on what we do. So question 4 assesses. You have to evaluate text critically and support this with appropriate textual references. You have to show that you are a thoughtful reader. You have to show that you can weigh up what is being written and think about the message. You can read between the lines, that you can understand the meaning of what you read and also what the writer is trying to do to make you see that meaning. Okay, you need to be able to think about putting the language under the microscope again and thinking about how the things you read are built and put together. The important thing here is when you are doing question 4, you can use your answers to question 2 and question 3. So when you're saying, I agree with this statement, the reason why I agree with this statement, one of the reasons you can give is a structure. The structure makes me critically evaluate the relationship because, and you can copy out actual chunks of things you've written in question 3 for question 4. You can say, I agree with this statement because of the use of language, and you can copy out chunks that you have used in question 2 for language in your answer. The time is limited because I want you to be crafty about how you answer it. Okay, so question 4 is worth 20 marks. You should therefore spend 20 to 25 minutes on it. clearly this is a big jump up from the amount of marks available in previous questions. And that's why there will be more to say in this answer. Now, question 4 takes us back to a question about an extract, not the whole text. So please, please, please be aware of that. It will say you should base your answers on lines 14 to 37 or on lines 21 to 40. The Alex Cold extract as well will base your answers from these specific lines. It wants you to focus on those specifically because the answers they're looking for are from that section. Okay. You can refer to other parts, but that shouldn't be your main focus because you won't get the marks for it. Okay, so you will be given an opinion from a student and you will be asked to respond. Okay, you should write about your own impressions. You should evaluate, so weigh up how the writer created these impressions, and you should support your ideas with quotes. This question requires you to write about anything which is relevant to your answer, including language, structure, tone, purpose, anything. Okay, so this is a typical question. A student has said, the writer makes it seem like you are inside the room with Dr. Frankenstein, experiencing everything he is experiencing. To what extent do you agree? In your response, you could write about your impressions of Dr. Frankenstein, analyze how the writer has created these impressions, and back up your answers with quotes from the text. So basically, it wants you to write about what you think of Dr. Frankenstein, why you think this, language, structure, tone, and then the evidence. So each one of these isn't a paragraph, not like question 2 or 3, okay, but it's a combination of these things. So each one of these could be a PEA paragraph. Make your point about your impression of Dr. Frankenstein. What technique has the writer used to create that impression? And then evidence to support that impression. Okay, so the writer makes it seem like you are inside the room with Dr. Frankenstein, experiencing everything he's experiencing. To what extent do you agree? So, for the first time, the bullet points are not listing separate areas to focus on. They suggest various elements which should be covered in each paragraph. So all 3 of these should be covered in each paragraph. Each paragraph should have a quote. Okay, in that sense, there is less guidance with this question. So you do need to plan. Okay, take the wording of the question. So I would reread the extract and think about this. Do I feel like I am there with Dr. Frankenstein? If I feel like I'm there, why? But if I don't feel like I'm there, why not? And then you apply that to the extract and pick out key quotations. Okay, remember the question is asking to what extent do you agree? So how much do you agree? So a balanced argument is needed. You can agree and disagree. Okay, so we need to look for things which make us feel like we are experiencing the event, but also things which make us feel like we don't, because that's why it says evaluate. So let's have a look then. This is the extract. Let's read it and then we'll go back to the question. So Dr. Frankenstein, there's a misconception over the years. People think Frankenstein is a monster. Frankenstein is not the monster. Frankenstein is the scientist who created a creature using dead body parts. So he used dead human body parts. He went through all these issues with losing his mom, and his mom died. And so he wanted people never to feel loss. He wanted no one to have to suffer grief. So he thought there must be a way to keep people alive or to bring them back to life. So he used dead human body parts and he created a creature, if you like, a human. But when that creature, when this thing came to life, Dr. Frankenstein was suddenly hit with a rush of consciousness and decided that what he did was wrong. Okay, and then he abandoned this creature. And for those of you that have read the book and or know the text, we actually do feel more sorry for the creature, because the creature never asked to be created. He never asked to be born. All he wanted was a father figure. But Dr. Frankenstein absolves himself of all responsibility. He runs away from this creature and leaves it to fend for himself. He creates it and then he abandons it because he's horrified with what he's done. Okay. And that's this part here. He spent months and months and months, if not years probably, creating this creature. Okay. And then when the creature comes to life, he's horrified by what he's done. And that's when he talks about the different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. So what he's saying is that nothing changes as often as a human feeling. He had decided, he had tried to create this. He was obsessed with creating this creature to the exclusion of all his family members. And yet, as soon as he's created it, he's filled with disgust and regret. And that's what he's talking about here. So the different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had ardor that far exceeded moderation. But now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room. He can't even bring himself to be in the room. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room. I continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. So he spent a long time walking back and forth in his bedroom. Okay, he can't bring himself to sleep. But at length, lassitude succeeded to the tumult I had before enjoyed, and I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavouring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. So finally, it got the better of him, and he did. He put himself on his bed in his clothes and he went to sleep. He wanted to just forget, again, absolve himself of all guilt. But it was in vain, because in his sleep I slept, indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth. Elizabeth is a woman he loves, and he's neglected her while he's been creating this creature. So while he sleeps, he has a nightmare. I thought I saw Elizabeth in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her. But as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. So first thing I want to draw your attention to is look how long this sentence is. Sorry, it's not that long, it's from here. Okay. So, and let's analyze his nightmare, just like Alex Cold has a nightmare. So in his dreams, he sees Elizabeth. She's looking healthy. She's walking the streets, and he's delighted and he's surprised. So he hugs her and he kisses her. But as he kisses her, her lips become livid with the hue of death. So they become blue, okay, with the color of death. Her features change. And instead of looking like Elizabeth, he sees the body of his dead mother in his arms. And she's the catalyst that started all this. His mother dying was the reason why he tried to create life. So it's like his guilt is getting the better of him. And suddenly Elizabeth's features change to those of his dead mother. And he sees a shroud. So instead of wearing clothes, she's wearing the white shroud she was buried in. And there's grave worms crawling in the flannel cloth. Okay, like she's been dead. And some of you might say it foreshadows that Elizabeth is going to die. Okay. Some of you might say it's Frankenstein's guilt, that he wanted to bring people back to life, but by doing so, he might have exposed Elizabeth to death, okay? Because he might have made Elizabeth a victim of this creature. Whatever it was, I started from my sleep. So he woke up with a jump. I started from my sleep with horror. A cold dew covered my forehead. My teeth chattered and every limb became convulsed. So he's basically shaking in fear and horror. Okay. When by the dim and yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster who I had created. So he wakes up from his dream, shivering and chattering, and through the moonlight, he sees a creature. He abandoned it as soon as it was created and it came to life, and he ran into his bedroom. But now it's come into his bedroom. I beheld, and look at the words he uses to describe it. He calls it a wretch, a miserable monster who I had created. So this creature, the wretch, the monster, he held the curtain off the bed, and his eyes, if eyes they may be called, were fixed on me. His jaws opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped, and I rushed downstairs. I took refuge in the courtyard outside, belonging to the house which I inhabited, and that's where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down in the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound, as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life. Okay, and here you get a description of him seeing the monster for the first time. I think forget everything else, okay? So focus on the question, which is, how does a writer make us feel like we are in the room with Dr. Frankenstein. The writer makes it seem like you are inside the room with Dr. Frankenstein, experiencing everything he's experiencing. To what extent do you agree? Okay. Now, again, this is a first person narrative. And you might be tempted to comment on the fact that what Frankenstein does is awful. You know, he's created this being, he's abandoned it. When this being comes into his room, he abandons it. It's like he's trying to communicate. Okay. It's like he's trying to, you know, putting one hand out. He's saying, Frankenstein's saying, it's like he's got trying to stop me from leaving. But how do we know that hand wasn't put out pleadingly, you know, for reassurance, for, you know, he's just come alive. He doesn't know who he is, where he is, how he's here. We don't know. We've only got Victor Frankenstein's thoughts and views. Whatever you feel about the monster, you have to put those feelings aside for now, okay? And just focus on, how does the language in here, in this extract, make us feel like we are there with Victor in that room? Does it? Which parts make us feel like we are there? Which parts make us feel like we are not there? Okay. And you would take the sections then, okay? And I think the evidence that we are there is here. We get a full sensory description of him waking up. Okay, it creates a vivid image in the reader's mind. You get the emotive language of the word wretch and miserable. And these words help us feel what Dr. Frankenstein is feeling. He makes us feel biased towards the creature. Okay, but remember, we're not analyzing how reliable he is. We're just talking about how he makes us feel like we are there. Okay, so the sensory description creates a vivid image in the reader's mind. The emotive language helps us feel what Dr. Frankenstein is feeling. It makes us biased towards the creatures. The overly long run-on sentences, especially this last sentence, which is this long, okay, is confusing. It's got lots of details and lots of information in it, and it creates a feeling of confusion for the reader, and it echoes Dr. Frankenstein's confusion. It helps us feel like how he feels. So the long sentence, the emotive language, the sensory description, what you can see, hear, smell, these all make us feel like we are there with him because it creates a really vivid description. But the part that doesn't make us feel like we are in there is the flashback structure. So when he's in his bed and he has this dream about Elizabeth, okay, it doesn't feel like we are there because we can't relate to it. It's a flashback and it's to Elizabeth who's not in the rest of the extract. And although he uses a description, it doesn't make us feel like we are there at that time because it's in his dream, whereas the rest of this is happening in the present time. Okay. So the writer makes it feel like you are inside the room with Dr. Frankenstein, experiencing everything he is experiencing. To what extent do you agree? So you could say, okay, your impressions of Dr. Frankenstein, how the writer has created these, and back up your answers with quotes. So let's see a sample one done now that we've got a little plan. As you can see, we have found points which cover language and structure. Any others? There might be, although the majority of points focus on how it is like we are there is one point of contrast, which is here. Okay, the hardest part of the question is finding the evidence to back up your answer. The evaluate element of the assessment objective is asking you to read the entire extract and decide how good it is at making you feel that way. Once you've made a decision, you need to find the parts of the text which give you that impression. And that's what students find the hardest. So I always say 9 out of 10 times, they want you to agree with the statement. How far do you agree with this extract? I agree with this. Okay, so remember, this is an argument. Numerous points should be made to support your impression. And here's one. I agree that the writer goes to great lengths to make the reader feel like we and the... Sorry, can you mute me so I'm not echoing back? Thank you. I agree that the writer goes to great lengths to make the reader feel like we are in the room, experiencing everything which Dr. Frankenstein is experiencing. And one of the ways in which this is achieved is through the use of sensory description. Shelley, who's the author, okay, so don't confuse the author with the I, who's Dr. Frankenstein. Shelley employs a wide range of sensory description in her writing. So not only do we read what Frankenstein sees, such as I beheld the wretch, but we also read about what Dr. Frankenstein feels and hears. When he wakes up from his dream, he feels a cold dew on his forehead. His teeth are chattering Every limb is convulsed, which means shaking. All of these images relate to how Dr. Frankenstein physically felt, and this allows the reader to get a complete sense of the experience. Okay, because he's describing his physical reactions, we're experiencing those as well. We also read about what he can hear when the creature muttered some inarticulate sounds. Inarticulate sounds mean sounds you can't understand what he's saying. By describing a range of the senses, what he sees, what he hears, what he touches, Shelley gives the reader a strong and detailed account of how the narrator feels, that it allows us to fully understand the situation and it makes us feel as if we are there ourselves. That's my paragraph and sensory description done. Shelley also uses sentence structure to make the reader feel as if we are there with Frankenstein. The incredibly long final sentence beginning, "I took refuge in the courtyard," is made up of numerous clauses, which means numerous sections, and it's so long that it's difficult and breathtaking to read. This is a deliberate technique used by Shelley, who wants to convey the fact that Dr. Frankenstein was feeling overwhelmed, just like the use of the sentence structure. So to show that he's feeling overwhelmed, we as readers feel overwhelmed because it's such a long sentence. It's so hard to work out what's going on in that sentence. Okay. Just reading this sentence is difficult and overwhelming to the reader, resulting in us feeling the same way Dr. Frankenstein is feeling. And this bit you could have taken from the structure part of your answer in question 3. However, remember it's an evaluate, so there is an however. There are moments in the extract where we certainly do not feel like we are experiencing the events with Dr. Frankenstein. When the narrator begins a flashback explaining that he had worked hard for nearly 2 years, this alienates us as readers as it refers to a timeline which is outside the chronological placement of the extract. It's happened before what we're reading, so we can't feel like we're there with him. This disjointed narrative structure breaks the illusion that we are there with the Doctor. Whilst the writer has gone to great lengths to create a sense of reality, realism, the structure, the way it's created, breaks this. In the same way, or similarly, the description of Frankenstein's dreams about Elizabeth being transformed into his dead mother inhibit the reader's feelings of being there firsthand. They don't make us feel like we are there because we don't know his dead mother. We can't relate to his dead mother. We don't know Elizabeth. We can't relate to Elizabeth. We don't feel like we are there. The use of this supernatural premonition reminds us that we are reading a work of fiction and therefore causes the reader to feel a sense of discontent with Frankenstein. Okay, now what you would need is a final paragraph here, an overall. And you would have to do an evaluation of one way or the other. Okay, overall, okay, I agree that the writer makes it feel like you are inside the room with Dr. Frankenstein. Okay, however, there are certain elements that break this sense of realism, and you just sum it up like that. So it's like a mini essay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Oh, I won't save that then. So you have got a copy of this. You have got a copy of the narrative voice. Okay. Essentially, what I want to say to you, and it sounds so patronizing, and I don't mean to be, but question 4 is quite an easy and a nice question to answer because it's about your opinions and your thoughts rather than having to find the technical words and find the technical structure. You know, how far do you agree? Yes, I agree because of this, this, and this, but this makes me disagree. Okay, so it's about your opinions and your thoughts. This I might do next week. Okay. So now that you've got a sample, can I ask everyone to get their workbook, their student workbook? I'm sorry, I should have reminded people that they need it for this session. Is there anyone who doesn't have it? If you don't, it's not a problem. I've got the extract on the screen this time. Has everyone got that? So
Yes.
if you have, brilliant. It's page 44 to 45. Okay. And again, if you want to, I would highly recommend it. from page 42 onwards, there is a whole section on question 4. Obviously, we're not going to have the time in the lesson to go through from page 42 all the way to page 55. Okay, so if you have time, okay, please do read through it. There's some really valuable stuff. I don't use everything in the books, and that's for a reason, because I give you my own work so you can work through the books yourself. Okay, it gives you extra information, extra revision. Okay, so the first thing that they look at is how characters are described, okay, and then how character is revealed in a first person narrative. So I'm not going to do how character is described. I might do this with you next week, okay? But if I can get everyone to turn to page 44, okay, and we are going to look at how character is revealed in a first person narrative. So what we're looking at essentially is the advantages and the disadvantages of having an extract that's written in the first person, like the Frankenstein one, like the Red Room one. Okay, whereas, and then we will look at third person, like the Alex Cold extract. That's not written from Alex's point of view. Okay, so the idea is to look at both and see how would we analyze them. Okay, an advantage of a first person narrative is that we as readers get to know the character better. We trust the character, we feel like we know their thoughts and feelings. Okay, a disadvantage is that we are told things by the character's point of view that might not be totally true. Okay, it comes from their point of view and therefore it can be affected by bias. Okay, so this is an extract that we are going to read from the viewpoint of a 10-year-old boy called Jamie. Jamie's sister died in a terrorist bombing in London in July 2005. Okay, quite a serious issue, but it's called My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece, and it's about his sister who died in these terrorist bombings. Okay, we're going to read it and then we're going to do some discussion points and then we're going to look at what impression we get of Jamie from this extract. Okay. My sister Rose lives on the mantelpiece. Well, some of her does. 3 of her fingers, her right elbow and her kneecap are buried in the graveyard in London. Mum and Dad had a big argument when the police found 10 bits of her body. Mum wanted a grave that she could visit. Dad wanted a cremation and to sprinkle the ashes in the sea. That's what Jasmine told me anyway. She remembers more than I do. I was only 5 when it happened. Jasmine was 10. She was Rose's twin. Still is, according to Mum and Dad. What do we know straight away from this? So when you read that he's a 10-year-old boy, Jamie, and his sisters died in a terrorist bombing, what do we expect? Because a terrorist bombing is a very serious, a very scary event. But how is it put across to you as readers?
The effect that put on the people.
How is it put across to you? How does it make you feel as a reader when you read this?
It's horrible.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. How has 10-year-old Jamie written this? Would you write?
I want to keep reading on.
A lot of details.
Okay, right. So, Deborah, why would
Drastic.
you want to keep reading on?
Because the structures that's been used at the beginning. So you want to know, 1 minute, 3 fingers, her right elbow,
Right,
her
good.
kneecap, you know, it's making you want to read on. What happened? Is there more to it?
Absolutely. And the other
Very
thing as well, I
drastic.
want, yeah, it's quite, I don't want to say humorous, but the way he uses it, he makes it really light-hearted, something that's quite horrific.
Yeah.
And I think that's because of his age. He's only 10 years old. So the way he's articulating it, we wouldn't as adults because we are adults. Does that make sense? We've got life experience, we've got a bit more empathy, we've got a bit more sympathy. Whereas as a 10-year-old, he's only basing what he knows. He's basing his writing on what he knows. My sister Rose lives on the mantelpiece. Well, some of her does. And the fact that, you know, there's only 3 of her fingers, they only found 10 bits of her body, that horrifies us. It's absolutely awful to lose a child in a terrorist bombing and then not to have a whole child, to have fragments of that child is too upsetting to articulate, to put into words. But he does because he's 10-year-old and he's devoid of compassion because of his age, because of his youth. Okay, and that's what makes us want to read on. Okay, and for such a serious topic, you know, it's a bit disturbing how he's written it. Okay, So my sister Rose lives on the mantelpiece while some of her does. 3 of her fingers, her right elbow, her kneecap are buried in a graveyard in London. Mum and Dad had a big argument when the police found 10 bits of her body. Mum wanted a grave that she could visit. Dad wanted a cremation and to sprinkle the ashes in the sea. That's what Jasmine told me anyway. She remembers more than I do. I was only 5 when it happened. Jasmine was 10. She was Rose's twin. Still is, according to Mum and Dad. So this bit still is according to Mum and Dad, makes it suggest like, according to Jamie, she's not still Jasmine's twin because Rose is gone. He only knew Jasmine as an individual. He's never known Jasmine as a twin because he was only 5 when Rose died. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So we read between the lines, still is according to Mum and Dad. So not according to him. That's what his mum and dad think. And if you look at the structure, okay, we get a description, then the focus changes to Jasmine, okay, and then we get the information about Jasmine, who's Rose's twin, and she was 10 when this happened, which means Jasmine is now 15, okay, and Jamie is 10. They dressed Jazz the same for years after the funeral. Flowery dresses, cardigans, those flat shoes with buckles that Rose used to love. I reckon that's why Mum ran off with the man from the support group 71 days ago. When Jazz cut off all her hair, dyed it pink, and got her nose pierced on her 15th birthday, she didn't look like Rose anymore, and my parents couldn't hack it. What do we learn here? What do we learn here? We learn so much in this section.
Yeah, he just explained what happening throughout their family. She just turned to teenage and doing things like that, teenager stuff, and obviously, normally parents are not happy with that, and he just explaining this all.
Okay, but so that's the surface part of it, that Jasmine has rebelled like teenagers do, and parents are not happy. Anyone who's got a teenager, I can feel their pain. My son's only 12, but I swear he's 16. But what in depth, if we read between the lines, what can we work out?
Would you say like a new
The more
identity coming away from being a twin?
Right, good. Okay, so it's almost like Jasmine, or Jazz for short, was forced to wear the clothes that Rose used to love, not Jasmine used to love. So it's like almost by losing Rose, the parents forced this identity, like Deborah correctly identified, onto Jazz. It's not Jazz's identity. Flowery dresses, cardigans, flat shoes. Actually, when Jazz rebels, she's the opposite of what Rose was. The flowery, girl, she sounds more like a tomboy. She cut off her hair. She dyed it pink. She got her nose pierced. Okay. So from this, we can work out that perhaps an identity was forced onto Jasmine. So not only did she lose her twin, she was forced to become the Rose that her parents lost, okay, through no choice of her own. What else do we learn about the family from this bit? Where's Mum now?
She
A
ran
broken note
with
now.
a man from the support group.
She just ran away with someone else.
She's run away with somebody else. She's left the family. She's left Jasmine. She's left him. She's left Dad, and she's run off with a man from the support group. So Mehek, you're not on mute, so we can hear you. So,
Sorry, Sana.
that's all right. Don't worry. So we can assume that Mum was going to a support group, which is probably a support group for parents who have lost children to help them grieve. Okay, but she's ran off with somebody. Who does Jamie blame that on? What reason does he give for Mum running off?
When Jazz got
Yeah.
off.
Jazz.
Yeah. Jazz. And in his childish 10-year-old view, okay, it could be that the loss of Rose created a massive divide between Mum and Dad. If you look at the first extract, we, as older narrators, learn things that Jamie's not telling us, like the fact that Mum wanted a grave and Dad wanted a cremation. That suggests straight away that Mum and Dad are fighting. Mum and Dad are not coming from the same starting point of view. And this bit here, with the fact that Mum ran away, could be that a culmination of 5 years of the loss of Rose, the dealing with their grief in different ways, has caused a separation between them. Okay, but in Jamie's innocent viewpoint, in childish way, he's focused on the here and now. And in the here and now, when Jazz became 15, she sought her own identity. She cut off her hair, she dyed it pink, she got her nose pierced, but he thinks that because she didn't look like Rose anymore, my parents couldn't hack it. Okay, and you've got all this informal language. He's writing the way he talks like a 10-year-old. Okay, but we as readers don't take him at first face value. We read between the lines, and we know there was problems with the parents from day one. Okay, we know that poor Jasmine has suffered in many, many ways. She's finally found her own identity, and we also know that mom has run off with somebody else and left the family. Okay, we go back to Rose's body parts now, and again, just brace yourself because it's not, you know, he's a kid, so the way he's written it is a little bit disturbing actually. They each got 5 bits. Mum put hers in a fancy white coffin beneath a fancy white headstone that says My Angel on it. Dad burnt a collarbone, 2 ribs, a bit of skull and a little toe and put the ashes in a golden urn. So they both got their own way, but surprise, surprise, it didn't make them happy. Mum says the graveyard's too depressing to visit, and every anniversary, Dad tries to spread the ashes but changes his mind at the last minute. Something seems to happen right when Rose is about to be tipped into the sea. Okay. And again, we learn about how they resolve their problem, their issue about the body. You know, mum gets her 5 bits and dad gets 5, and it just seems so clinical, doesn't it? You know, but they both got their way, but neither of them were happy. Again, it gives us another indication that mum didn't run off because of Jazz. Okay, mum was unhappy anyway. And even though mum got what she wants, the graveyard's too depressing, and dad got what he wants, he still can't spread her ashes. And it sounds like neither of them have got what they want, because what they both probably want is Rose back. Okay, and they can't have that, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is. It seems like from the beginning they don't agree with this.
Yeah.
With her
They
death.
don't believe she'll
Yeah.
die. Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
problem.
they're grieving, aren't they? Their grief
Yeah.
is coming out in various ways. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Now there's a section here for some reason that I haven't got on my screen, and I don't know why. So if you've got the book, it's on page 45. I'm going to read out that last paragraph. I don't know why I haven't copied and pasted it. If you haven't got the book, I apologize. You'll just have to listen. So we've got to the bit where something seems to happen right when Rose is about to be tipped into the sea. I mean, look at the way, like literally tipped in. She's not going to literally be tipped into the sea. One year in Devon, there were loads of those swarming silver fish that looked like they couldn't wait to eat my sister. And another year in Cornwall, a seagull pooed on the urn just as Dad was about to open it. I just started to laugh, but Jazz looked so sad, I stopped. Okay, so you know he can relate to his sister Jazz, but it almost seems like because he was so young, he can't really relate to Rose or the loss of Rose because he never really felt it. What he has felt in the intervening years is his parents separating and Jazz being so upset by it all. Okay, so there's some questions on here, and the first one says, with a friend, discuss the following questions. Is that the one that I've got? Jamie, as a narrator, tells us a lot about what has happened in the past. How accurate is this how likely is this compared to what actually happened? So how accurate is his response to what actually happened? We talked about that. We talked about the fact that he's a child. So actually what he remembers is very, very different, okay, to what the mom remembered, or the dad remembers, or Jazz remembers. What could have caused Jamie to get anything wrong or to change history? How could Jamie have got some of the details wrong or
Because
less
might
accurate?
oh, yeah,
probably
he
thought-
was young. That's
Sorry.
why he was.
One at a time, please.
You
So
go.
I think probably the fact, you know, like amount of ribs and things he might have gotten wrong, and when it says 71 days ago, so it's just like a number. He might have got that wrong.
Okay, but I have to stop you there, Mehek. I think the 71 days he's got right. And I think by remembering the exact amount of days that his mum's gone, although he's being blasé about it, although he's just brushing it off like it doesn't matter to him by saying, you know, that's why she's run off 71 days ago. The fact that he remembers a specific number of days that his mum's been gone suggests that he's really hurt by it, that he's really affected by the fact that his mum's left.
And he
Okay.
counting in day
He's
by day.
counting, yeah, and each day
Yeah.
matters. So
Yeah.
there are certain things that we think that he could have got wrong. Like, for example, you know, the
His
reason why
age.
mum left here, okay, or even that the fact that the parents are not happy. You know, from a child's perspective, he doesn't remember Rose. He only knows Rose through what his mum and dad have told him and what Jasmine has told him. Okay, so there are details that he could have got wrong. But what impression do we get of Jamie from this extract? What impression do we get of him?
He doesn't like, you know, what his mom done to Jess as well. I do think he also he's so small, but you know, we are with him in this aspect, isn't it? Um, and yeah.
And also the fact that I mean, as the line last line suggests, that he started to laugh. I mean, he's not taking things very seriously, but
Yeah.
he sees her sister Jazz, who was a little bit older than him at that time and who remembers the event, and so he tries to stop himself. So it's
Yeah.
more like written in a very humorous way, that he doesn't really remember a lot and he
Yes.
doesn't really get the feeling of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I wanna say. He's not very emotional about
Yes.
what happened.
Because he doesn't
It's
remember
like
it because he wasn't there.
watching TV or just relation. He related information what's happened in the past in
Mhm.
family.
Actually, yes, Roxanne, I do think, you know, when we are, you know, I can remember on 10 years old, even I were, you know, this that was not as important as now
Exactly. Yeah.
for me, you know, if
Because
I
you're
was on
young. Yeah,
yeah,
you
on a funeral, I would laugh, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
but
You find it you'd
now,
giggle because you had to be quiet, you know, and just the
yeah,
fact that you had to be quiet, I mean, that just
yeah,
set off a trigger. Yeah, I
yeah,
agree.
the way other people cry, it would make me laugh, but now it wouldn't. Even a
Now it
tear
wouldn't.
make
Yeah.
me tear as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the main point we're getting here is that he is a child. Okay. So his recollection, the impression that we get of Jamie is that he can't really relate to Rose because he can't remember much about her. He can only relate to Rose through the events that happen. So, for example, this bit here that Mehek pointed out to, or I think it might have been Layla, I started to laugh, but Jazz looked so sad. I stopped. His emotional response is to Jasmine because he's got a relationship to her with her, and he doesn't want to upset her. Okay, but he actually found it really funny that a seagull pooed on the urn just as his dad was about to empty it. You know, that's a 10-year-old or 9-year-old at the time's childish humor. Okay, so what impression do we get of Jamie and what impression do we get of his family from here? Okay, he's a child, so his ideas might be a little immature. He may have forgotten some key information and be biased. The time having passed like 5 years may have caused him to forget things, or his anger at his parents' attitude, or even his grief at losing his sister. Okay, the time you can clearly see he's got anger. You know, mum took 5 pieces and dad took 5 pieces. I mean, by putting it so bluntly, it sounds so horrific that the parents could be so petty almost about who gets what, and she's passed away. You'd almost think that the parents, one of them could be the better person and say, actually, let's just do this because at least whatever's left of her is going together. And he's almost angry at his parents at doing that. I mean, probably he's certainly angry at his mum for leaving. That's why he's put 71 days. He may exaggerate things. Okay. So I haven't got the rest of that extract. I have got it here in the homework text, so I'll put it up on the screen, which is here. Okay, but if you've got the book, it's on the page 46. We moved out of London to get away from it all. Dad knew someone who rung him up about a job on a building site in the Lake District. He hadn't worked in London for ages. There's a recession, which means the country has no money, so hardly anything's getting built. When we got the job in Ambleside, we sold our flat and rented a cottage, and we left Mum in London. I bet Jazz 5 whole pounds that Mum would come to wave us off. She didn't make me pay when I lost. What do we learn there?
He had a hope that his mom would come,
Yeah.
and but she didn't.
He didn't. And the fact that he he had a hope that his mum would come, but the way he presents it is a joke. But we as adults can read between the lines. I bet Jazz 5 whole pounds that mum would come to wave us off, and then she didn't make me pay it when I lost. And I just find that so sad because,
Yeah.
you know, he lost that bet and he was so sure that his mum would come to see him off. And that's like a 10-year-old's desperation who still needs his mum. And she never came. And Jazz understands how disappointed he would have been that his mum hasn't come. And that's why she didn't make him pay. The money doesn't matter to her. It's about the emotion. But by putting that bit in there, we read between the lines and we know that he's missing his mum. You know, he wants her around. He wants her to care. They're leaving with dad and mum's staying in London, but she didn't even come to wave them off. And that matters to him. In the car, Jazz said, let's play I Spy, but she couldn't guess something beginning with R, even though Roger was sitting right on my lap, purring as if he was giving her a clue. So Roger is the
Cat.
cat. Okay, purring on the lap. Okay, it's so different here. So talking about Lake District, it's so different here. There are massive mountains that are tall enough to poke God up the bum, hundreds of trees, and it's quiet. No people, I said, as we found the cottage down a twisty lane, and I looked out of the window for somebody to play with. So again, lots of things here. Okay, a little bit of humor. Huge mountains, tall enough to poke God up the bum. So what he means is they're so high. There's hundreds of trees. It's quiet. I mean, he's come from London. London is a capital city. There's hustle and bustle and there's noises. And it's just a cottage down a twisty lane. And, you know, there's no one to play with. He's 10. No companions for him. Our cottage is the complete opposite of our flat in Finsbury Park. Our cottage is white, not brown, big, not small, old, not new. So you can tell from this, the flat was brown, small, new. Art's my favourite subject at school, and if I painted the buildings as people, I would turn the cottage into a crazy old granny smiling with no teeth. The flat would be a serious soldier, all smart and squashed up in a row of identical men. So basically, he's using his artistic streak to kind of create this picture in our mind. So the cottage is a crazy old granny smiling with no teeth because it's old, it's got character, whereas the flat would be a soldier all smart and squashed up with identical smart men, which kind of indicates that it's like a terraced flat, one after the other. They all look the same. There's no individuality. Mum would love that. She's a teacher at an art college, and I reckon she'd show every single one of her students if I sent her my pictures. So can you see how in almost every paragraph, mum's making a comeback? Mum's making, you know, mum is mentioned in there. You know, not dad would love that. Mum would love that. She's an art teacher. I reckon she'd show every one of her students, just like he bet she'd come and see him off, and she didn't. Okay. But he's still, you know, that love for his mum is still there, that hope. Even though mum's in London, I was happy to leave the flat behind. So basically saying he's happy to leave the flat, but not mum. My room was tiny, but I wasn't allowed to swap with Rose because she's dead and her stuff's sacred. That was the answer I always got whenever I asked if I could move. Rose's room is sacred, James. Don't go in there, James. It's sacred. I don't see what's sacred about a bunch of old dolls, a smelly pink duvet, and a bold teddy. Didn't feel that sacred when I jumped up and down on Rose's bed one day when I got home from school. Jazz made me stop, but she promised not to tell. What do we learn about from this extract, from this part?
I think the grieving is going to go on for a long time.
Do you think he's grieving Rose, or do you think he's grieving something
family.
else?
I mean, the family,
family.
the entire family.
Yeah,
So
I think he is grieving having parents who are grieving for Rose.
yes,
Having parents who are not all the time there for him because they're so consumed by their grief for Rose.
yes.
So his whole life has been shaped by Rose. Don't do this, dress like this, wear this. Rose is, you know, on the mantelpiece. We're going to Cornwall. We're going to Devon to scatter the ashes. You know, this is Rose's room. You know, his room is tiny. I wasn't allowed to swap. It's almost like they made a shrine for Rose because of their grief. You know, and he can't understand it because he's a child. You know, don't go in Rose's room. It's sacred, and he doesn't see what's so important about a bunch of old dolls, a smelly pink duvet, and a bold teddy. We get a triple there, but he doesn't understand because he can't relate to Rose. He can't remember her. But those things are important to mum and dad. They're part of the grieving process. And then he tells us something that he didn't feel sacred when I jumped up and down on Rose's bed one day when I got home from school. So mum and dad are not around and he's rebelling, you know, because he can't go in there and he can't touch anything and he can't move in there. He's jumping on her bed. Jazz made me stop because obviously Jazz remembers Rose, but she promised not to tell. So he knew he'd get into trouble from it. But I think Jamie is really, really, really affected by the death of Rose, but not in the way that his parents are, or not in the way that Jasmine is. He's affected because she's dead and the way his parents have responded. Okay. So if you go, what impressions does he give of his family? He's a child, so his ideas might be a little immature. He may have forgotten some key information. The time passing may have caused him to forget things, or his anger at his parents' attitude, or even his grief at losing his sister. He may exaggerate things like how small his room is, or how his parents dress his surviving sister. He's sarcastic about the fact that his parents are not happier. You know, they both got what they wanted, cremation and a burial ground to visit, but surprise, surprise, it didn't make them happy. He has a sense of humor and tells us of the various incidents that occur when they try and tip the ashes into the sea. He's irritated by his parents' behavior, such as making his surviving sister dress like his dead sister. He seems pleased when his sister rebels and cuts off all her hair. Okay. Now, I'm going to stop there. It's 8:30. It's been a long lesson. You've not had a break either. Okay. But I just want to talk you through the homework. On page 47, and I will send you out the sheet as well. It says, evaluate the way the writer has presented Jamie. What do we think about him at the end? Okay, so evaluate the way the writer has presented it, Jamie, with a focus on the end. What do we think about him at the end? Think about sentence lengths, how details are listed, and the effect of those details. Okay, so I want you to do me a 20-mark evaluation question based on Jamie and the impression we get of Jamie. Yes, talk about language and the fact that he's sarcastic and he uses humor and, you know, he reveals information without realizing he's revealing information. Talk about the sentence lengths, but the main focus should be on that extract from page 46. Okay, what impression, sorry, evaluate the way the writer has presented Jamie. What do we think of him at the end? Okay, so it is on here. Okay. So read the homework this week is read the AQA guidance, which I'm going to email you, the one that I spoke to you at the beginning of the session about with the pass, merit and distinction. Okay. Read the passage below and answer the exam style question. Okay. I'm going to change that. I'm going to write, evaluate the way the writer has presented Jamie. What do we think about him by the end? And then I've just put the end extract on there, but you can use the opening extract as well. Okay. So very briefly then, read the AQA guidance on presentations, answer this exam style question and do the punctuation worksheets. Okay, please don't send me the punctuation worksheets, but do send me this. It's a 20-mark answer, so sending me one paragraph is not going to be enough. It needs to be in-depth response to how the writer has presented Jamie. Does everyone understand that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, I'm going to let you go. I'll just say one last thing. Expect some emails from me, one with the homework on it and the PowerPoint from today's lesson, and one with the AQA guidance for the speaking and listening. Okay.
Thank you.
And I shall see you all next week.
Thanks a lot.
Roxana,
Okay.
remember to press the stop recording when you finish,
yeah,
and then that will
okay.
trigger the email.
Right, let me do that now.
Hello.
I'd forgotten.